Hello, and welcome to another hopefully fabulous episode of the Cloud Native Testing Podcast. I'm your host, Ole Lensmar, CTO at TestCube, and I'm, of course, super delighted to be joined by Matt McLane at .work Network. Matt, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good today.
Great. It's great to have you. Please tell us about yourself. What is Doc Network? Not everyone will know. And then I know you've been working on a very special project that I'm eager
Yeah.
to talk about.
So my name's Matt McLane. I'm the DevOps engineer lead for Doc Network. We're a small company. We have just under 50 people and a dev team of around 16. In that dev team, I'm the one and only DevOps kind of guy. So I handle the cloud, infrastructure, networking, observability, and all the tools that provide all that stuff. But more importantly, I make it so that that's all accessible to the developers and make it so that they can do their jobs more efficiently and do all that. Doc Network, as I said, we're a small company, but we do a lot of great stuff. We provide registration, health forms, and all of that kind of stuff for schools and camps. We literally help kids go to camp safely by providing a platform that these organizations can use to get their kids there and to make sure
Mm.
that they're safe while they're away from home. So that's kind of what we do.
Great. Okay. Thanks for that. It's super interesting that you're the only DevOps engineer, and that kind of spurs some questions. But just
Yeah.
before we started, you shared that you've been last year be rebuilding your CI/CD pipelines. That sounds like something that most people will want to do one
Yeah.
sooner or later. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So let me start with where we were. We had a Jenkins based pipeline that was, the Jenkins would build the artifact, but then the rest of it, the CD portion of
Hmm.
the pipeline was very manual process. We would have developers get into a room 2 or 3 times a week and they would put that new container in a dev environment and they would do some testing. But the dev environment wasn't really a dev environment. It was actually more of a staging environment because it was connected to the production database. So they were putting the code on, testing it to make sure that it met their acceptance criteria. And then off the top of their head, they would work through whatever regression tests that they could think of. And then they would manually, repeat the build and then deploy that to the production environment.
So CD was basically manual. So it was
Yeah,
MD.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
The CI portion, it was largely automated, but even there were pieces of it that were not necessarily automated. If they had to do, configuration changes or if they had to do database updates or, whatever, that was all done by
And
hand.
what's the scope or the complexity of the application?
No, we got away with it for a long time because we do have a fairly simple application. It's a web-based application written in JavaScript. So we're largely just building a container
Mm.
that gets deployed on a Kubernetes cluster. And so, that wasn't so bad. They were just updating, some values here and there, and then our tooling would kind of do some of that rollout.
Mm.
But it was more around validation and knowing, having confidence that the code that we're deploying was not gonna mess something up,
Mm.
and we just didn't have the infrastructure or the processes to deploy that in a reasonable way. And more importantly, it took a lot of development hours, a lot of hours from the dev team. We
Mm.
calculated that it was taking about 30 man-hours per week just sitting in those deployment meetings because we would have, like, 4 or 5 people sitting there at the meeting because they had written their code, and then they had to, review it and
Mm.
go through it, and it was just a very
Mm.
labor-intensive process. Yeah. So we wanted to rebuild it. We wanted to get rid of Jenkins and move to GitHub Actions. We wanted to improve our process, well, improve the tooling. So we use Argo CD for the
Mm.
management of our Kubernetes clusters, but we wanted to make that process easier. And as the world worked, the guys at Acuity had just deployed this new tool called Cargo.
Mhm.
And it's a beautiful experience. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's
So
really
I'm
beautiful.
familiar with it, and
Yeah.
we've looked at integrating it with TestCube. So
So
that's super
we
interesting to hear. So how are you using Cargo?
Yeah, so we put Cargo in the mix and we redid the whole pipeline process and the whole flow. So now we got rid of those meetings completely. And
Mhm.
instead of having our developers deploy code through the 4 environments that we have
Mhm.
our QA people do that. Now,
Oh,
our
okay.
QA people are not developers. They needed I don't want to say flashy UI, but a UI that made sense and
Mhm.
you can see what they're doing. And so Cargo provides that. New containers come up. it handles an automatic deployment to dev, and then as those versions get updated, QA can evaluate when it's ready to go to QA,
Mm,
our QA environment,
mm.
and they can manually do that by just saying promote, and
Okay.
Argo will handle that. And then once they're happy on QA, then they can promote it to staging and finally production all on their own without
Mm,
having to touch any code or, the backend systems or anything like that. Cargo does
mm,
all that. And that's been great. It's literally making our dev teams um so much more productive that our bottleneck is now the QA team.
Okay.
Right? And
Yeah.
that's where it is. Now, that being said, what we need to do is make our QA more efficient, and that's where testing has to come in. And as you alluded to, we're able to make Cargo integrate with our test environment. And so whenever we deploy to QA, it'll automatically run a suite of Playwright tests that we're
Mm,
writing right now. And then, so what that does is Playwright runs and acts as a virtual user and goes and clicks in the UI in
mm,
a browser and traverses our application and runs a suite of tests that the QA person would normally run.
mm, mm,
If it finds any issues, it takes a snapshot and collects those as artifacts and stores them so
mm,
that
mm,
we can go review what was wrong or what
mm,
didn't work and go from there. The idea is it's going to make their job a lot quicker. And
mm,
so we can just process more code
mm.
and get those deployments out faster.
And do you see that you would automate like the provisioning or the promotion across environments if those tests pass, or is there still like a manual step
That
involved?
That's a good question. I can see a world in which we promote from, say, our QA environment to a staging environment
Mm,
if they pass. But we're always going to have a manual step in there. I don't know if we would ever get to the place where we would be able to completely eliminate all manual testing,
mm,
because automated testing, there's a level of confidence you have to have. Like there's a level of trust, and
mm,
they notoriously can be flaky. And we don't have an engineer to write tests or to
mm.
shepherd those tests at this time.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's that's so far out in the future that I don't know if we ever would. But also, I think you want somebody there to manage the when it gets
Mm.
deployed to the next environment and the timing of it. And so having a manual process there does do that.
I've seen others use Cargo or another tool to build promotion where they automate. They have like defined quality gates using some tool like Test Cube or whatever, and so that kind of helps them automate promotions. But then maybe not into a production environment, but into a staging environment. Then doing more in QA, do more exploratory testing ad hoc, like kick the tires at the edge cases and
Yeah.
the unusual behavior. But to your point, you do have to have a reasonably complete end-to-end testing suite, like with Playwright or some other tool that you'd trust to kind of provide a reasonable level of confidence before promoting a
Right.
release across
And
environments. So I
and
think that's what a lot of
where
people are aiming for, but getting there is you never know. You only know what you only test what you test. So you don't know
right.
what am I not testing, and calculating coverage on UIs can be obviously very tricky.
Yeah, and where we're at right now, we started with a whole lot of unit tests,
Mm,
and that was the level of testing we had. We're working on writing those playwright tests to get a lot of our past coverage done.
mhm,
Where I'd like to see us is for us to redefine what we consider our level of done when
mm,
it comes to a project or
mm,
a feature, right? And that level of done should include observability and testing. And so if we could have that, then it gets put into the project timeline that, well,
mm,
now we have to write the tests. It's a new feature
mm.
or, whatever. And we just haven't quite got there yet. So but we're talking about it, right? We're
It
trying to work
takes
that
time,
way.
obviously,
Yeah.
because you're also building a product at the same time. So,
Yeah.
and are you looking into, maybe you are already are creating ephemeral environments like as part of your pull requests?
We are. Yeah.
How are you doing that? And are you running tests in those, both manual and automated, or I'm just curious, kind of how does that ties into the process?
That's been a big that that's actually one of the more exciting project that we have going on right now. We are using a tool called Tilt, and what Tilt does is it lets us define how to build and then deploy an ephemeral environment in our,
Okay.
that's how we use it, right?
Yeah.
So the developer can, from the command line, just say tilt up, and it will build a container that isn't shipped to our standard repository. It's shipped to a repository that is just their own, so that it doesn't fall into the regular CI/CD pipeline process. And then it will stand it up on our Kubernetes cluster and provide them with a unique URL. And that's super great, right? A developer can just say tilt up on code that is not committed,
Mm,
um, and be able to look at it, right? Or more importantly, have somebody else look at it and say, "Am I in the right place or not?"
mhm,
Without shipping it to the dev
mhm,
environment. And then they can easily tilt down. So
mm,
once we have that working, we can use a GitHub action to do the same thing. And we have set this up as a proof of concept. We haven't fully integrated it into our work process yet, but the idea there is that whenever you do a PR, it's going to tilt up and provide an ephemeral environment for that pull request
mm,
so that somebody can go look at what that looks like
mm.
as part of their code review. And then once you merge, it'll tilt down and bring that environment down. Once we have that working, we could easily run tests against it.
Yeah,
And that would
definitely.
be really great, right?
Yeah.
That's in our long-term plan. We just haven't quite gotten all there yet.
Okay, that's super interesting. I mean, I've heard of Tilt used, like you said, for local kind of ephemeral environments. So for dev to kind of spin up whatever they need to kind of deploy the version of the code they have locally and then run tests against it or whatever. But what you're saying is you would actually use that in your CI pipeline to
Yeah,
generate as part of the pull request, and then you could both manually validate, but you could also run automated tests against it. Like whatever, the only thing that changes is the endpoint, and I'm sure you could make your Playwright tests configurable on that. So you just
exactly.
send in, Brian, and run these Playwright tests against this endpoint instead.
Yeah,
Automate.
exactly, and then we can also send like now we have a standing URL that we can send people to, so we could ask our client success team, "Hey, is this the feature that you want?
Mm,
Is this what you're thinking of?" But it's not done. We're not done developing it, right?
mm.
Like it's not in dev or staging or whatever. It's just kind of in that PR stage, right?
Yeah.
So we can change it before we've committed it and merged it in with everything else,
Mm.
and that tell you, I think that's going to be it's gonna change everything for us once we get it fully implemented.
Yeah. No, that sounds super powerful. Like I said, I haven't with in like the PR process or flow things. I've seen people using tools like vCluster and just Argo. I think has some native capabilities to create temporary namespaces where it deploys things.
Mhm.
So that's what I've seen, but super interesting to see Tilt in that context as well.
Yeah. Yep, and it's a simple YAML file that you've added to the repo, and then you're off to the races. It's gonna be great.
Going back to testing, where my head's at. So you mentioned that you have a QA team. How do you kind of, what's your, like as a dev, as the single DevOps engineer, how do you interact with them? And what's kind of, how do you divide the responsibilities for maybe not just functional testing, but non-functional like load testing or like other aspects of quality?
Yeah,
Where do those fall between you and them?
right. So as I said, we're a small company, right? Our QA team is one person.
Okay, well,
Um,
it's a good start.
and and she started as a client success person. So the reason that we have her in place is she has a very deep knowledge of our application and
Hmm.
how it works. And so as they develop new features or change features or whatever, she can spot where how that all lays out in the application itself. But
Hmm.
she doesn't write code, and she doesn't that part she doesn't know. So as I said, a lot of her testing is done manually because that's what she knows and she's
Hmm.
good at, right? And she does that and she shepherds through the deployment now.
Hmm.
When it comes to Playwright tests for those end-to-end testing, that's all written by the developers. When it comes to load tests, we do have a set of load tests that we run, and I'm largely responsible for that. So what we'll do is we'll stand up a one-time environment that is essentially an ephemeral environment, but
Hmm.
that it'll be around for a month or two. And then we run a series of tests against, well, they're written in case 6 and they do our registration process. And then we scale that up so that we have 2,200 or 4,400 people registering all at once.
Hmm.
And so that's what that looks like.
Hmm.
They're K6 tests, so we don't really use the browser, but it provides a whole lot of load all at once on our
Mhm.
on our
Okay.
application pods. And that's one of the things that we are very sensitive to is we we have at times what our organizations call competitive launches where you'll have a camp that says we're gonna open up our camp registration at 12 p.m. on Tuesday, and you'll have thousands of people just waiting to click the
Mm,
button, right? And that kills our infrastructure if
mm,
we're not ready for it. So we have tests that simulate
mm.
that. That's our hardest hitting
Mm. So
experience.
how do you correlate to your point? You generate X amount of virtual users or in an ephemeral environment, and then I guess you have some capacity or resources allocated to that ephemeral environment, and then do you just multiply by okay we were able to achieve with this resources we achieved this throughput and we need to achieve times 10, so we'll just times 10 the resources in production, or how do you kind of go from the numbers you see there to actually deciding on your production capacity?
Yeah. So largely we do math for sure. We've put together a dashboard that shows like that we can correlate. So we can say, here's the virtual users, here's our throughput. At this point, this is where the database started having issues and try
Mm,
to identify that kind of stuff. Ultimately though, we try to model our load testing target environment,
mm,
the environment that the load tests are hitting.
mm,
We model that after our production database or production environment. And then we run it again and we try to scale it up and we do it until the load test passes cleanly and doesn't
mhm,
fall down, right? And then and then we add a little bit when we go to production.
mm,
So, we'll make our databases big and
mm,
beefy and have extra read replicas and then we'll
mm,
run it again. It's a
mm.
long and boring process as you just run the test, reset, run the test. It takes about a week, week and a half of just running tests, but it's something you got to do once a year.
Okay, so the process, you run the test, you look at the results, and then you tweak the configuration of your infrastructure, and then you run it again. Okay, interesting,
Yep.
interesting. Okay.
That's largely how we do it.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Just going back to so the QA person that you had, she was more, it sounds to me like more doing like almost like exploratory testing in like an as integration tester. So she was
Yeah.
just, because she has, like you said, the big picture. Is she involved with the dev teams, like when they build new features to help them, think of ripple effects of what they're doing?
Yep.
Is okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're very integrated in how they work, and she ensures that like the acceptance criterias are all met on the tickets. So, as something gets merged into our application repository, it builds a new version of our dev environment. Or
Mm,
well, it builds a new container. That container automatically gets deployed to dev. Our QA person will go in right away and say, "Are all the acceptance criteria met?" And then she
mm,
starts looking at, well, what things are we going to need to test?
mm.
And she works that out with the devs. And
Okay.
then once we've accumulated enough of these deployments, that's when she'll promote it to QA
Mhm.
and she'll start through her script of
Okay.
regression tests.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. I have to ask, I've been talking to a bunch of testers over the last months, and after some initial skepticism, people are going more and more in on AI for helping them with testing and like translating maybe requirements to what should I test, or even
Yeah.
using like they're generating playwright tests and those kind of things. Is that something you're interested in looking into, or to what extent, or is AI being used across your team? Do you know?
Yeah. So in Doc Network, AI is not heavily leaned on. It's used by some of our teams in various ways, but it's kind of disjointed. Our dev team doesn't use it too much right now, other than we use GitHub Copilot to help us
Mm,
code
mm,
and to answer questions.
mm,
Having said that, we've just last week started implementing what we call guilds, and it's just a way to kind of have an ad hoc group of people in our dev team, but across team, across our dev
yeah.
team to focus on a topic. And one of those guilds is the AI guild, and they're
Mm,
just starting to look at like, well, what recommendations can we make to bring all of our organization into a space where we use AI in a better way?
mm,
And then also what are other
mm,
options and opportunities for
mm.
AI? I know that our director was just last week on your webcast about how we can use AI in
Oh,
code.
really? Okay.
Yeah. So I know that there's at least some interest. It's just we haven't quite got there yet,
Mm.
right?
No, to your point, I think a lot of people are interested and intrigued, and like obviously there's a lot of very very positively biased information if you
Yeah.
go online. But the people, I mean, many people I've talked to are when they actually try it out, they are kind of often surprised by actually how helpful it is. Obviously, it doesn't replace, like it's a tool, right? Like any other tool, and it's
Hmm.
an assistant. But used the right way, it can definitely, I think, help in many workflows. Also, testing
100%.
QA
I
other
wouldn't
things.
I wouldn't trust AI on its own because it's a computer. It doesn't know that it's
Mm,
lying, but it
mm,
does, right? All
mm.
the
Yeah, yeah.
time. It presents wrong information as if it were true. So you have to have somebody there to validate it,
Yeah.
right? But I can absolutely see how it can be useful. We just were talking about how occasionally the AI in our GitHub repos can provide really pretty useful information
Mm,
about like summarizing what a pull request is.
mm,
And if we could add in there, you should check this, this, and this. I mean,
mm.
that I could absolutely see that being beneficial,
No,
right?
no, I definitely agree that you can go far beyond the just, generate this code for me.
Yeah,
I think at a higher level, like I said, translating requirements to test cases, test biased here, or like translating verbal test cases to playwright scripts, or
yeah.
helping you just think of edge cases. You could say, hey, what are some edge cases that I might not be thinking of when I consider this functionality? And it'll obviously, to your point, it'll some things it'll come up with will be like, okay, never mind, bad idea, but others will be like, oh, actually, that's a good idea. So, or like a good thing to try out. So,
Having them write playwright tests would be really useful. I will say that there is some nervousness about having AI read our code.
mhm, mhm.
And there's I don't think we'll ever have AI read our database because we have a lot of
You
PHI
have
in there,
sensitive
right? I
data.
mean, we maintain kids' health records. We don't
Mm,
wanna
no, definitely
make
not.
that available to an
To
engine,
an
right?
LLM. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. No, that makes a lot of
but
sense.
but, I can see, like, if we could have AI help us write tests, that would be pretty sweet.
Do you see like in as a DevOps in DevOps related tasks, do you see AI writing config like Kubernetes manifests, or where do you see it
I
do you
mean,
see any use cases where it could help you?
I use it. I mean, just yesterday was using AI to try to help solve some problems around running a cron job, and it was hit or miss whether or not
Mm,
it was even right. You know
mm.
what I mean? As I said, sometimes it just lies to you. It's like, no, it doesn't
That's
work
not
that
right.
way, or no, I'm not trying to create a cron job. I'm just
Mm,
trying to create a job because I'm trying
mm,
to. But I do use it all
mm,
the time, in part because I find it in some ways is a really good search engine for
mhm,
like how does this work, but it's
mm.
not the end, right? I gotta know that I gotta keep in mind that it's not always right, and so I gotta
No, no,
validate it
it doesn't
myself,
know what
you know
it's
what I
doing.
mean? Yeah, it doesn't know what it's doing, it's just pretending it knows what it's doing. Yeah, but I do use it all the time. I mean, getting Copilot in VS Code changed everything for me.
No, I'm kind of going down that bandwagon also. Awesome. Matt, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you here and to learn about your journey there. I wish you good luck, obviously,
Yeah,
with
thank you.
everything going forward with Doc Network. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you very much.
Bye bye.
Bye.